for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. I'm greeting you today from sort of sunny, cloudy, cold Southern Florida at the Insights Association CEO Summit. So greetings from being out on the road. I'm excited to chat today. There's so many companies out there that are grappling with developing B2B marketing strategies, sometimes for the first time, or sometimes just evolving them so that they deliver real impact and ROI. But with the right approach, it is possible. So today's guest, Nirosha Methananda, unlocks growth for B2B brands through creative marketing strategies rooted in analytics and innovation. My favorite. As an experienced CMO and the founder of Sati Marketing, Nirosha has led data-driven marketing transformations for Influ2, Bombora, and many others. She's here today to shed light on the critical elements that fuel B2B marketing success. Super excited to hear her thoughts and tips on this topic. Welcome to the show, Nirosha.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks very much for having me. And if it makes any difference, I'm also in a very cloudy and rainy London. It's going around.
It is going around globally, apparently. We're experiencing clouds and wind and cold, but we're going to bring a little bit of brightness, hopefully, to the show today.
Indeed.
Well, let's kick right off. Talk to me about some of the maybe most common and most effective B2B marketing strategies that you've used successfully.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really sort of take and approach, especially when you talked about setting up a B2B marketing program, is the strategy itself. There's a lot of businesses that sort of run before they can walk, in my opinion, and actually being able to take a step back, look at what the business needs, look at what the targets are, look at what your resources are and what your tech is, and then be able to develop a solid strategy from there that looks at the short, medium, and long term. That in and of itself is a strategy, and the sort of the first thing I do when I come into a business from a marketing perspective. And then from there, one of the things that I think is really important is understanding what tools you have, making sure that you have your metrics set up, and then looking at what programs are going to be most effective for the business. So, if a business is in its early growth stage and they're still developing the product marketing becomes really important. If that's established and you have the content and the brand and so on and so forth, demand gen becomes really important. So I think for me, it's really not necessarily about specific playbooks that I take and apply, but it's really understanding business needs and then applying strategy accordingly from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a really important kind of starting place, right? Because I see this a lot, businesses doing really good marketing tactics and then wondering why something's not really working. And it's like maybe they skipped that strategy step.
Yeah, it's something that I find, and it's hard because especially in this market, when you have a board or a leadership team that is really driving for results, you need to really be able to move fast and execute. But the thing is, it can mean very short-term gains and not be sustainable in terms of what the execution is. And then even in your go-to-market, I've seen with some companies more recently that you can tell it's this scattergun approach, and what it looks like is the company itself doesn't know where it's going. So if the company doesn't know where it's going, it's going to be very confusing for the target audience. And that's another reason why I think it's really important to kind of steer it back I don't think you don't have to do a chapter and verse in terms of what your strategy is, but I do think having alignment and being able to agree on what the direction is, at least for a couple of quarters, I think is super important. And then it also helps from a team perspective, because your team knows what direction they're heading in. It gives them something to work towards, and hopefully you work all together to be able to achieve that. And that's another important thing.
Yeah, that alignment, and not just within the team, but like across leadership as well.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you do get, as a marketer, pressure from the board and from other
Yeah.
leaders in the business for those short-term results. But I mean, you talked about this when you were talking about strategy, like creating a strategy for short, medium, and long term. I mean, how do you do that? How do you devote the time to the really critical long-term strategies while getting the pressure to drive short-term results?
I mean, the way I've sort of approached it is looking at, okay, well, in your strategy, setting it out, and then being able to execute and do projects. So, um, in some businesses they call it sort of skunk works,
Mhm.
and I guess it's like the skunk works of your marketing. So if it's a longer term strategy, or if it's a longer term go to market, or whatever it is, being able to sort of take time out from what I call business as usual. I'll sort of divide up my programs and activities into business as usual. So they're the things that you need to just have going. They need to be rolling. And so whether you have a team, one of your team working on them, or whether you outsourced it, or whatever it is, these are your always on, sort of marketing things that need to be happening. And generally, what those things are. And you can set them up. And then with the longer plays, I usually pull together teams from not just marketing, but across the business, because some of those long-term strategies require more input and a committee in essence to be able to drive those things forward. And so that's kind of how I've managed to sort of split things from that perspective. And they can be anywhere from, I don't know, special thought leadership pieces, research. It can be new go-to-market brand. If anyone's done a website, that's
Mhm.
always that's always a special project. Um,
Yep.
that is more of a long-term investment. And I think on that point, like rushing through a website and investing that money, and then rushing through your changes and not getting it right, total waste of money, in my opinion. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I sort of have done in previous lives.
I love the idea of those longer term strategies and projects being cross functional, because that does, when you have buy in from other teams, it does give you a little bit more time to focus that resource. Because there's no question of like, well, what's marketing doing over here? They're working on some long-term project nobody knows about, right? It's very
Yeah.
transparent then, and collaborative, which kind of buys you some time to really do it properly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and you raise an important point, because a lot of the times, it can be like, what's marketing doing? So if you bring people, this is a term I learned at when I was at PwC in Australia. If you bring people on the journey, and I used to quite loathe that term, but it's actually, it's quite true when it comes to marketing. Bring people on the journey and involve them and get them invested and get their feedback and make it that. Then you're not spending your time having to list and justify what you're doing, because they're actually involved in it. And the thing is, with a lot of marketing assets and whatever is produced, it's not just marketing that has to take and drive and use those things. In a B2B environment, it's usually sales, or it's customer success, or whoever it is. So from that perspective, they're actually your end user. Yes, your target audience is your customer, but one of your target audiences is actually your internal audience, and that is probably an audience that is uh, much overlooked. Although we talk about internal alignment, and getting sales and marketing working together, I'm not sure that necessarily gets as much attention as it should, in the
Mm.
context of what's being done and how important it is.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So that sort of like committee type group work does help to bring that closer together a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
So when kind of going back to, starting with the strategy, don't jump right into the tactics and trying
Yep.
to deliver. When you're developing a B2B marketing strategy, what key elements do you focus on first?
So I look at what the needs are in terms of the business. So I always speak to all the key stakeholders across the business. I always speak to, and not just leadership. I speak to, key people within the sales team, key people within CS, obviously the marketing team as well, to get a really good sense, and then customers as well, because it's very interesting when you speak to customers and you get their perception of what the brand is, what the product does, and so on and so forth. What an internal idea is versus an external idea can be so differing. So being able to really get that understanding and feedback of that, 360 degree, looking at what your competitors are doing, and how that's positioned, and then looking at a lot of what your tools are, what your resources are in the context of what the targets are, and from that there being able to establish, okay, well, what's the best program going to be? For example, I was working with an organization, a very niche organization. Obviously, the market is quite tight at the moment, and they didn't have great big budgets to be able to go and spend and splash everywhere. But they still needed to be they really needed to be very targeted in what their approach was, and efficient. So rather than looking at, doing broad brush advertising, doing broad brush sort of campaigns, it was really about being very, very, very tight and finite around who they were approaching, around their segments, around who their target audience and their personas were. And it was building a strategy around that. And, where you typically, a marketing program would encompass a broader umbrella. It was really just focusing on this one bit, rather than sort of trying to boil the ocean, because they didn't have the money and they didn't have the resources to be able to do that. So that's why I think, like, having that view allows you to kind of really tighten in and focus on what is best for the organization, to be able to move the dial. And I think that gets lost a lot, I've seen in companies, because you can kind of take this playbook and be like, oh, well, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And it's not, I don't think you have to do X, Y, and Z. That's kind of the way I always approach it,
Yeah.
from that perspective with a strategy.
I mean, that's a good formula. It's like, what do you need? What do you have? This plus this equals
Yeah.
what's going to be the most effective. Which I think, like, I've seen it maybe on both sides, right? Where companies have really limited resources. So don't do anything, or don't invest in the right areas. Or, like you said, try to boil the ocean with a limited amount of budget or tools. And then nothing really works that well. Or even
Yeah.
the flip side, companies that have a ton of resources and want to invest in marketing skip over that strategic piece of understanding the business needs and just dump a bunch of money into stuff, and then later say, marketing doesn't really work. We spent a lot of money on it and we didn't get the return. So it's those two things together, that the understanding the needs internally plus what do you have at your disposal equals a formula that, like you said, I love that you said, like, it's not a playbook that you just use that works for another business. It's got to be unique to the needs.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think it sounds so logical when you say it, but I actually getting there and getting to that, like, hey, what do you need? What have we got? What can we do that's realistic? Is it just in so many of my experiences, I've just seen where that goes totally out the window. And I
Mhm.
think it's because everyone's in this sort of panic mode of, like, we need to do something, we need to do something. And it's like, what is it, Chicken Little? Like, you run around, the sky's falling. Actually, no, stop. it's not falling. You need to think logically about what it is you're going to do, rather than panicking. I know it's hard. Obviously, it's a tough time right now all around, and businesses are under pressure. But actually, because businesses are under pressure, they actually really need to be strategic and think hard about what it is that they're doing, more so now than ever.
It really is. I mean, how do you how do you make non-emotional decisions about this stuff? Because you're right, it is very logical. I mean, this is the whole concept of the show, right? We're trying to demystify these concepts that feel really hard. And this concept of the sky is falling, I've seen a lot of businesses look backwards at all of the mistakes or bad decisions, or we should have been doing this 6 months ago. But really, like, you just have to say, okay, here's where we are today. Let's look at data. Let's look at the formula and not panic. And just start now, right? Don't look back at what maybe didn't work or how you got to where you are today, but start now and build from there.
Yeah, I think it's about learning, learning from your mistakes. It's not a mistake if you learn from it. If you don't, then there's a problem. But I think being no one's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes, and certainly businesses make mistakes. But you need to be able to take the learning from it and be able to apply it. And I think part of that comes from a lot of communication and having open discussions and being honest. Especially with leadership. I think there can be sort of a culture of like not being honest and like having rose-colored glasses, or just rose painting over different situations and not being honest. I mean, I think I can err on the side of being a little bit pessimistic, because I think that's a consultant's job to sort of find what's wrong and fix it. I have that sort of mindset, but at the same time, like you do need that balance of like, hey, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? And what can we learn from it? Rather than being like, oh well, it'll all be fine, and we'll go, just keep rolling. I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah.
Right now, I think B2B marketing and certainly in tech have had a real great ride for the past couple of years, and you can see, like, with the investment slowing and so on and so forth, like that's starting to come to an end, if it hasn't already. So the ability to sort of stick your head in the sand and keep rolling, and the money keeps rolling in. That's not the reality right now.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you definitely have to be, making really smart decisions and proving the value of the strategies that you're implementing. And like you said, communicating clearly. And I mean, we talked a little bit before about these sort of like cross-functional groups and bringing people into the marketing process. How do you think about, like, how do you create that sales and marketing alignment? That's the big question everybody always has, in order to, make sure that everybody's on the same page about the marketing strategy and how it's actually serving that team.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it comes back to making sure that they're involved from the outset. So if I'm going to be building a strategy, and primarily it's there, a lot of marketing is there to serve sales. It's not something I'm happy to admit. I think a lot of people aren't happy to admit that, but it's there we are there primarily to serve sales. So it doesn't make sense to create something that doesn't fit the need from that perspective. I'm not saying take everything that sales says and run with it. There needs to be some subject matter expertise put around it and advice, but just actually starting there with the feedback. So pulling together strategy, making sure that that they're involved, that they know what the strategy is, they know what's coming, having those regular meetings and communication. I actually think from a business perspective, embedding sales and marketing together, especially like, and I think we're going to talk about this later from an account-based perspective, but being able to take those teams and pull them actually together, it kind of it breaks down those barriers, and then it brings that approach together in a way that is not siloed. And that's actually to really execute account-based everything. You can't have teams that are operating in silos, certainly from a high level. But if you from my perspective, if you're looking at an account, you need to be strategic around it, especially if it's enterprise. You need to understand who the players are, and you can't just take a scattergun approach. So I think for me, the evolution is actually pulling these like teams together that have marketing and sales embedded, and go after these accounts from that perspective. I think that's where I see a lot of alignment coming from. Because when you're working day in and day out in the trenches with people, that's where part of it comes to culture as well. Being able to have those relationships, have that understanding, that I think helps immensely, and it's very underestimated, the power of how that can influence how the business performs.
Yeah, it's true. Those internal relationships and that sort of mutual trust and respect across teams is like, aside from you can have all the business conversations you want. And if you don't have that foundation, it's really hard to actually be aligned, because there's, I've seen it go really well and I've seen it go really poorly, where sales and marketing is like driving in the same direction and driving towards the same goals. Last week, a guest on the show talked about having shared goals. Like, if marketing and sales have different objectives, then they're not going to work together. And something you just said, I think we should jump into the account-based topic. I've been wrestling with this a little bit recently. When you said account-based everything, it struck something for me, because it's branded, quote unquote, account-based marketing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what an account-based strategy should be, because it's not marketing. It includes marketing, but there's got to be a sales component. There's all different channels. It's like ABM is no longer just like a targeted ad serving platform, right? It's a complete strategy. And I struggle with even the name of it, this ABM, account-based marketing strategy, because it misses so many components. Anyways, how do you think about using a account-based strategy to drive that alignment and those results?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you 100%. Like, I think the name limits it in terms of what the approach is. I think there's also so many definitions of what account-based marketing is, from actual, platforms to strategies. The way I interpret account-based marketing is it's a strategy that you would apply to a market you're going after. I think from an alignment perspective, it's effective in being able to, from a top level, be able to go after accounts at scale from that perspective. But to be honest, I think we sort of, from just historically, marketing was sort of one-to-one, one-to-many, and I do honestly think it's coming back to a one to, not one, but a one to few from that perspective. Because like, yes, it's great to be able to target an account, but say if you've got an enterprise account, and depending on what you're selling, there's probably like 10 people within that account. I don't know, there's always these studies on how big the buying committees are, but actually making a decision, if you think about, okay, where does my product, what is the relevance of my product within this organization, and who actually can buy it, and if you map it, it's maybe 10, 20, 30 people from that. And if you're looking at an account of thousands, you're going to target 1,000 people within that organization. Obviously you can segment it down to roles and this, that, and the other. But I think there's so much of that marketing happening right now. It's really saturated. So being able to come down to that personal level, and to be, I think there's going to be if there isn't already, what's the word, like not a collision, but it's going to be a complement between B2B and B2C, because from that perspective, it is about the relationships you have. It is about being able to connect with people, having empathy in what your marketing is, having an understanding of what their needs are. And it's not just that from a business and professional perspective, it's understanding who they are personally as well. And those are I think the strategies that are going to connect. So I don't necessarily, like, I think ABM is a no-brainer right now. If you've got if you have limited time, resource, money, then why wouldn't you do that? To focus your efforts. But if you want to convert, from my perspective, you really need to take like a very focused, like one to few, and be really personal in your approach. And I think those companies that have their systems set up and they can take that next step and get very personal, with their targets, I think they're the ones that are going to have great success.
I think what's interesting about that is, like, it feels almost counterintuitive in the sense that, like, targeting fewer people with something highly personalized when you have limited time and resource, it feels like, well, that's going to take a lot of time and resource to create and execute on that. But in fact, it's a volume play, right? We need automation, and the more people, the better, and the more generic the message. But the market is so saturated, as you said, with that type of content, that to actually make it effective, that sort of shifting that and focusing those resources, think of it as focusing the resources as opposed to spending more time and resource on a smaller market. Like, we talk about like spear fishing as opposed to fishing with a wide net, like actually reaching the target people. And I think that in a sea of automated messages and generative AI and all of that stuff, that personalization is actually the ticket to cutting through the clutter. At the moment. But it does, like, I think that's a blocker for people, like feeling like, well, actually, I don't have the time and resource to invest in that level of personalization.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you talk about AI, from my perspective, that's actually that's the perfect tool. I'm not sitting here thinking about how AI can, write better copy for me. I'm thinking about how AI can do mass personal marketing and actually help to connect. I think that's the point with AI, and we'll probably see it come to an evolution where it starts to be used for that. I have seen different solutions where they at the moment, a lot of them use large language models, and there are solutions that use smaller, more personal models. And what that does is it allows you to create these personas that are quite, they're not just one-to-one, but they're quite applicable and very tight across, who you need to target. And so I think that for me is where AI can actually be very valuable, from a marketer's perspective, and help you reach efficiency. Whether the technology is there at the moment, I don't, nothing I've seen. But I have also it's growing exponentially, and I'm not a computer. But yeah, I would also, I would see that happening very quickly, and especially with these AI companies, if they want to monetize, especially in this industry, that's where I would be investing in my tech and building out my technology.
Yeah, that's a really great point. There's definitely a lot of new tools that just continue to emerge and come out, and there's a lot of ways you can play around with it and test it out to see, if it can help you create some of that efficiency. And maybe this is kind of a nice segue. Like, what are some of the new strategies or new channels or new tools that you see emerging in B2B marketing that are exciting for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have, I won't mention anything specifically, but I think I touched on it. It's those tools that allow you to be very personal,
Hmm.
for me, that I think are going to make a big difference. So, I worked for a company that was, and, by no means, I want to influence or, adversely endorse, but, Influ2 was person-based advertising. There are other tools that help you recognize and understand who is on your website at a person-based level. Um, there are tools that you can use to be able to really target and look at who's attending events. So you can start to do that outreach. You can customize it, and you can do that in a very coordinated way. And I think those tools are the tools that are going to enjoy. Perhaps the ABM kind of spotlight in years to come, because they will allow you to actually be super targeted, get to who you want to speak to, and speak to them in a way that is very personal to them. Whether it's like I think having someone's name, for example, on a website, I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. I think it's really about looking at, okay, well, what content do they need? How do you serve that up to them, and how do you serve it in a coordinated and timely way as well? I mean, obviously, data, for me, data is oil. I did a presentation. That was one of my key takeaways. Data is like oil. If you don't have data and you don't have your data organized and clean, you're how do I put it politely? Like, you're behind the eight ball.
Mm.
Um, you data is going to be like the oil that fuels your engine, and if it's not right, like, even now, even with the tools you have, if your data is not clean and you're trying to pump, into these fancy tools, it's useless. So, I think that's has been and is going to continue to be pretty powerful. But I think those personalized tools, for me, is probably where it's at. And obviously AI, I think AI at the minute is, I think we're very personal with how we're using AI in the application of it, and I think it needs to go a bit more business orientated.
Mm.
um, from my my with some of the tools that I've seen, and more for the mass than for generating comments on LinkedIn and I don't know,
Right.
doing your personal social media and stuff like that. I don't particularly, I'm not particularly excited by those applications of it, but that's just me.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of that, people not really knowing what to do with it,
Yeah.
so defaulting to stuff like that. But really, there's actually quite a few more maybe complex, interesting applications for it. I think the personalization tools are really interesting. One, and some of them are new and emerging. Some have been around for a long time. I'm curious, like, how do you evaluate tools like this? Because I think, a lot of people struggle with choosing the right one. There's a lot
Yeah.
of technologies out there, and maybe not limited to personalization tools, but really any martech tool, but specifically around personalization. Like, how do you know it's going to deliver the type of results that you're looking for? Because all of these companies have great sales teams, and they sell the dream and all this intent data and all the amazing things you're going to be able to do with it. But what do you look for when you're evaluating a piece of tech like that to make sure that it's going to actually do what you need it to do?
Yeah, so I have my one test question when I am looking to get a piece of tech is, how are you going to make my life easier? And how are you going to make my team's life easier? Because if it's not making your life easier, then what's the point? Um, and that comes back to resource and how you're able to use it. I think in terms of looking at that, like, it's really about understanding, okay, well, what is this tool, what purpose is it serving, or purposes does it serve? If you're getting one tool, like, one tool can have 5 or 6 or 7 different applications depending on what the tool is, and you need to, like, look at it and think, okay, well, how many of these am I actually going to be applying and using at any given time, and what is the rollout for it in terms of our size, our maturity, our need, and so on and so forth. The other thing I do, and I highly encourage people to do, is, yeah, you're right. Everyone sells the dream with these platforms, and I've had to learn the hard way. You know, ask for a POC. Ask for a POC. That's
Mm.
and ask for a POC that is actually going to give you enough time to implement and set up and see results, and be very what's the word, strategic around what you are looking for and what results, and evaluating it and following up. Because I know, I mean, obviously I've come from martech vendors, and that's been my background and my experience. If you are going to invest in the tool, there's no point like investing in it and then leaving it there, and then at the end of the POC, not having any results because you haven't invested in it. From my perspective, like, I don't invest in tools unless I'm like, yep, we're going to use it for X, Y, and Z, and we're going to have X, Y, and Z done by this time. This is the resource it's going to take, and these are the results I expect to see from it. So being like, having a plan around what it is, because sometimes these implementations and things can roll on, and you're not even getting value from them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we're seeing now. There's especially with MarTech tools, there's a consolidation of these stacks, because everyone has a tool for this and that and the other and whatever, because they've had so much money to be able to go and buy all these different tools. But then, when it comes down to looking at, okay, well, what's actually working? How much can I afford? Because my budget's being cut. You start to have to really look at what you have and what you're going to continue with, and how you start using them in different ways and applications, perhaps not in the way that you hadn't necessarily intended. But I think there's going to be an adaptation and consolidation of all of these different MarTech tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as companies are trying to get more efficient with their spend.
Yeah.
How do you think about whether a company is sort of building a MarTech stack from the start, or they're trying to make an existing stack actually work for them? Like, what strategies do you recommend for sort of evaluating what's the baseline? What do you need? What's an optimal, like, these are the things you can't live without, and here's some things that maybe are a bonus?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'll sort of look at is, from a startup perspective, are the core around communication. Like, communication is obviously a big one. CRM and having your data is another one. Looking at keeping your data clean, and making sure that you have a system that's not going to be arduous, so that you can update that quickly, is another big one. And then it's looking at, okay, well, what programs do you have? Because there's some, and what content do you have? There's some of these tools, they rely heavily on what you have. And if you're a brand new team, you don't have any content in place, you don't have any campaigns in place, and so on and so forth. There's no point going and getting a tool when you have to input everything into it and you don't have anything. So that's where I sort of start with the core of the foundations, and then from that, as you build out your program, build on. I mean, one of the things, when I had to do, in my previous role, was really look at how we were going to consolidate. I had to go through this process of consolidating tools and looking at the investment, and we had a tool for a knowledge base, and I had to really look at, okay, well, this tool we're using it for the knowledge base. What other functions does it have, and how can these other functions serve? Another example is like, from a communication perspective, you can have an email like a HubSpot or so on, any sort of email tool. But then if you look at like an outreach or something like that, it still does the same thing. It sends emails out. They're just one-to-one emails. And generally they go out because they are one-to-one, and sales emails, they go out quickly. And I know that there's changes with Google and the email limits and thresholds and so on and so forth. But it's like, that's what I mean. Like, look at what the purpose is of what you want to do and what your program is. So, for example, with that client I spoke about earlier, they needed to be really targeted in their approach. So for me, rather than invest in an email marketing system, it's probably better for them to use an outreach for the sales team and for marketing to work with the team on building out those cadences for who the targeted audience is, and putting and investing their time into that. So you have to look at, like, okay, well, what's the purpose, and then get the tool. Like, not sort of like invest in these tools and then find a purpose for them.
For sure.
I think that's that's a really important thing to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like, I love what you said about looking for the other capabilities within a tool that you already have to maximize it, and sort of like, hey, what are we not taking advantage of that we could be? And maybe it's not even another purpose. Maybe it's just we're not actually seeing this tool for its original purpose, and kind of investing some time into that. I've had the experience of having to cut tech, and or not even having to, I shouldn't say that, but having the luxury of not having to look at how much we were spending on tech. And then all of a sudden saying, actually, we could be a lot more efficient. There's stuff we're not using or not maximizing. Where can we find that efficiency? And in some cases, even switching a tool to save a little bit of money wasn't worthwhile because of the resource it was going to take to make that switch. So that's a factor. And in other cases, there were things that we weren't using to its max capacity that, rather than just cut, it was like, actually, we could be getting so much value out of this if we devote some time to it. So it's not always about cutting or consolidating, but what you said, like, finding the purpose and making sure you're using the stack that you have to serve that purpose.
Yeah, 100%. And one other thing I will say that I've used in the past is, when you're in that sales process and you have to build a business case, get the sales, whoever is selling to you, or the account manager, whatever it is, to build that business case for you, because like, they're the ones who know what that tool is, and if they're good at what they're doing and they know the tool and they know what the purpose is for you, then that helps you not have to do that, and two, like, they build that business case for you and think about how they're going to retain you and what the long-term value of you is as a customer. So, I've done that previously, where I've been like, cool, I need to put a business case together for this. This is what my needs are. You've done all this discovery on me. Tell me how this tool is going to help me and how I need to structure it out so that I can get this business case approved. I think that's always something I enjoy doing as well.
I love that suggestion. I think it's great. And it also, like, just creates a partnership. Like, it's not, I'm not a buyer and you're a seller, or, it's not transactional anymore. Like, be a partner to me, help me meet my goals. And some of that is, help me prove why we need this, prove it to me, help me prove my leadership. I love that suggestion. That's a great one. And so, okay, now we've got all of our tech stack in place. We've got our strategies in place. We've got our programs running. How are you measuring, tracking, and maybe even communicating the performance for the marketing strategies that you are putting in place?
Yeah, I mean, so what I think everyone has probably either seen a CRM. So my experience has been with Salesforce, so building the infamous dashboard, showing you weekly, monthly performance, workflow, and so on and so forth. So I think that depending on your setup, that can be a large undertaking or a small undertaking, depending on how good your marketing or RevOps has been. But I think it's a worthy investment, having that visualization, having something where it's in black and white, so to speak, and for everyone to be able to access and see, is great communication. And visualizing it, I think, is super important. In terms of the specifics of metrics, I think there's the usual metrics that you sort of use in terms of MQLs, SQLs, influence, so on and so forth. But I feel like, you touched on something earlier, Jen, around having separate metrics, from a sales team, silos, because you can always say, you can say, well, I got this many, we well, not I, but we got, X number of MQLs. It's not our fault that sales this, and then sales can come back and say, well, they weren't that great, or whatever it is. I think having those unified metrics and looking at the metrics. So one of the things, that I've done, that I did sort of last year, was I did, through Pavilion, like their CRO school. And I did that purposely because I think, marketing, I think either the CMO role is going to transition to the CRO role, or marketing will indeed come under the CRO in many years, in years to come. Might not even be that far away, to be frank. So being able to look at what the metrics a CRO takes into account from a business perspective, and being able to map the metrics back from that perspective to the bottom line, I think is invaluable, because then it puts your marketing metrics in terms that the business understands, rather than looking at how many leads you did, or this, that, or the other. It's actually this, this is the deal, these are the deals, this is the value, and this is how we're working together with sales. I saw a great presentation from someone named Leslie Allore, and the way she was structuring out her metrics were in terms of marketing contribution. And the reason I really appreciated her approach was because it changes the language. And again, this is something that's, I think, very underestimated, is the language and the meaning of the language and the terms we use. So I've always been someone who's been really particular about, when an internal project name gets named and then everyone starts using it, I really try and stomp that out as quickly as possible.
Me too.
Yeah, because what it does is it creates a perception and a psychology around it. And it's the same with these metrics. So if you look at contribution, that's as a term, it's what you're contributing. This is what we've done. This is what we're doing, or whatever it is. And I'm oversimplifying what it is her process is. I can share. She shared her deck and what the approach she's taken. But I really like the way that she rolls up a lot of the marketing metrics into this contribution and into retention, and then you can map them across to the LTV to CAC ratio. There's all of those sorts of things that you can relate back to those business metrics, and that makes marketing, not a cost center. It makes them a partner in this business, because we are. Not a marketer is sitting there thinking, yeah, I'm just going to do this for the sake of doing this. And I think it's part of that perception that needs to change. So for me, that's where those are the metrics, and that's what I think the approach needs to be. And it's a perception shift around the value that is delivered, and especially for the marketing team itself. Because we can get really in the weeds around, hey, this did this and this did this, and you can go super granular with it. And in some aspects, yes, you do, but I think at an executive level, it really needs to be lifted up.
Yeah. And it feels more collaborative that way too. I love that, that language is really important. I think we've got a new target guest for the show. So we'll see if we can get her on talking about that. But I love that concept of contribution versus attribution, or, this is what we did versus what you did. And, it's more of a sort of team effort. And I think it's also really interesting what you said about the CMO role kind of moving into the CRO role, which, that was my experience. I was leading a marketing team and went into a CRO role because,
right.
I felt like in order to, maintain the value of the marketing team internally, like it needed to be more closely tied to revenue. Our activities and our goals and our strategy needed to be fully joined up. And, several years ago, it was the headline of like oh gosh, of course I'm having a moment with my words, but that CMOs have the shortest tenure, right? In these average tenure of a CEO is 6 months or whatever, CMO. And why is that? And I think that's the why. It's like, CMOs were not proving their value from business metrics and business strategy. And so I started to see some really successful marketers move into these either chief growth roles or chief revenue roles and actually tie in, like, connect the dots between marketing strategy and revenue growth. And all of a sudden you have a totally different, position in the business, and you're really driving results. And like you said, no longer a cost center. Now you're generating revenue, and you're tying those two things together and showing everybody in a really clear way how you're doing that. I think that is I agree with you. I think that's the future of where marketing has to go. Otherwise, it's going to go away because it's hard to prove the value, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it. I don't think it can go away. I think there still needs to be that function, but I agree. Like, I think tying it back to revenue. And the other thing that I've done as well, in teams that I've led, I've made sure that I tie, whatever the role is, I try and make sure that everyone's contribution and role is tied to that. So, I always use my designer as an example. Looking at like what at a numerical level, what's produced, what campaigns it goes on, what the impact of those campaigns are, because then for that individual, they're able to see as well, what their contribution is and how it's performing and what they're doing. And I think, making sure it's cascaded down to the team, and even from an individual contribution perspective, it really helps. It really helps to be able to give visibility. It helps them be connected to the purpose and the goal holistically, and it helps motivate the team as well around these shared goals. Because I think sometimes these roles, especially from, if you've got a large team, it can get a little bit lost, in the forest of everything that's going on. So I think that's something that I really did try to do with the teams I've managed, is make sure everyone has an understanding of where their contribution, no matter what it is they're doing, actually, stands and how it contributes to the bottom line.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think people like to see how the work that they're doing is, connected to the overall business goals.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really that's the point of OKRs, right? Like,
Yeah.
What are the business OKRs? What are the team OKRs? What are the individual OKRs? And how do those all link up together? It's kind of hard to create those, but doing it properly has a big impact, because people feel like they can see the connection there, which is really important.
Yeah, 100%.
What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that B2B marketers are facing today?
I think, obviously, do more with less. I'm quite sick of hearing that, but it's just reality. I think the challenge is in being able to tackle the changing nature of what B2B marketing is, and balancing it in terms of what the business needs are. One thing for me, so just a personal thing, I've been a generalist throughout my career, and that's been a choice for me. And I've managed across marketing. I think one thing I've noticed is brand. Brand can be a bit of a dirty word in B2B marketing. And that's what I mean by balance. There needs to be a balance across brand. There needs to be a balance across demand, and product. And those things need to work in concert to actually produce, in my opinion, to produce good marketing. And I think there is a challenge in terms of the perception around different functions of marketing and being able to balance. So particularly for marketing leaders, I think that's going to be a challenge in balancing that with businesses that are suffering from the economic environment. And then, the other thing is the acceleration of technology, and especially now with AI. It's, to be fair, I've been looking at different roles, and each role kind of says, make sure that you can, what's the word, manage a team and use AI, um, using AI for efficiency. And that's all well and good to say, but then there, yeah, as I said, like, these technologies are coming so quickly to market, keeping up with understanding what actually is going to be helpful versus a hindrance. And some of them are a hindrance.
Hmm.
I like to experiment with different technologies, and I wanted to be able to like create a video through AI. And so I went through that process, and I posted on my LinkedIn some time back. But actually, using AI to create that like a video from like the initial prompt around what I wanted, to editing, to pulling the video together with an AI. I didn't even do video, I just did a voice, and editing the voice so it sounded natural. It took quite a while, and for me that's not helpful. you
Right.
know what I've heard people say, "Oh, marketers are lazy," and I hate when I hear that, because we're not. We're so busy doing so many different things. We can't give attention to. I don't know. In my experience, if you stop in one place for too long, something else falls. So you have to keep moving, 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 and so your time is so precious. So if you're looking at all these different solutions just to use them, it's not necessarily helping you. It can be a hindrance. So I think it's being able to really understand and keep a close breast of, like, okay, what is actually going to work and what is going to help versus hinder. I think those are going to be the biggest challenges that come, certainly certainly in the short term.
For sure. And I think too, asking some of those follow-up questions, like, I mean, this is like, insert AI into the sentence. It's not a new concept where leaders who are not marketers will say, we need a marketer who can do, growth hacking. We need a marketer who can do the metaverse, who can use AI, right? And it's
Yeah.
so important to ask that follow-up question, like, what do you mean by that? Right?
Yeah.
What exactly are you looking for? Because when there are a lot of buzzwords, which there always are,
Yeah.
there's always this sort of like, we need somebody who can do this. Well, why do you need that? What is it that you're actually looking to achieve? It goes back to what you said from the beginning of this conversation. What are the business needs? And
Yeah.
building a program, like, you don't actually need to use AI all the time for everything, right? There will be applications where it might be useful, and applications where I have definitely gotten sucked down the AI rabbit hole, doing stuff I have no business doing and spending a lot of time on it because it's sort of captivating, and you get in there and you're messing with stuff, and then you realize, oh my gosh, that didn't actually help me in any
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So connecting it back to what you said, connecting it to the business needs is how you're going to make it work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And just purpose. Remember what the purpose is. I always, that's a question I always ask. What is the purpose of this? What what is it that you're trying to achieve? Because sometimes when you ask that question, it's actually you can see it really kind of makes people step back and think, you know, because it's not clearly defined. And if you haven't clearly defined that, then anything, if you don't know what the purpose is, how is the audience going to know what the purpose is?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I can't thank you enough for coming on today from rainy, windy London. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for listening in today. I'm going to be back with another episode next week where I'm chatting with Neil Patel.